So now we are going to specifically talk about the contents I expect in your introduction and methods part, the write-up you submit in a week. So in order to prepare for this particular part, in the lab manual, chapter 7 describes the lab activity. Chapter 6 describes how to provide literature citations and some basic principles about scientific writing. So read those two chapters, and it should not take that long to read them. They're pretty much straightforward and kind of helps you to revise information you already know. For chapter 6 particularly, rather than reading the entire thing and trying to break it down entirely, just want you to pay attention to, refer to chapter 6 to know how to cite, how to reference articles, right? And with respect to the reading guide, I mentioned that I want you to buy the reading guide, which says Writing Papers in the Biological Sciences by Victoria Macmillan. So in that particular book, you would be reading first chapter 1 might be a good idea to understand how to search for literature. Now I have already provided you a short tutorial, a video tutorial, how to do that. So, but if that is not enough, reading chapter 1 will be a great idea to get a better knowledge about how to do literature search. That's actually described very well, how to think about the keywords and how to kind of fine-tune your search and all of that. So that's a great chapter to read, and these are very easy reading with several demonstrations. Chapter 4, in chapter 4, read parts related to introduction, writing and methods, materials and methods. Introduction, materials and methods. Do not read the entire chapter, chapter 4, just read the parts on intro, materials and methods. That should be starting from page 73 is introduction, starting from page 75 is materials and methods. So just read those parts, right? Don't kill yourself trying to read entire chapter of the chapter 4. Now, we did talk a lot about how to structure the hypothesis, right? And you are looking at human demography, and then I ask you to specifically think about human survivorship, right? And one of the first hypothesis is regarding survival of modern versus historical populations, right? So that's our overarching theme of your hypothesis, right? And the second one is regarding males and females. And I know that I provided you the leverage of picking another hypothesis, but just as an example, I'm going to stick with my male-female part, okay? Now, so you develop your hypothesis and you rationalize it. This is when you actually need to think about the background information, right? So how would you develop, this hypothesis? So how would you look for literature? What are you going to look for in literature search? So think about what dictates human survivorship, right? So if I were to hypothesize, this is kind of something I'm really interested in, like kind of in terms of teaching this class. Is human survivorship is actually decreasing, right? Because of the, poor practices, lack of exercises, lack of physical activities, too much sitting down, sedentary jobs, I don't know, eating like shitty food, right? Instant food, fast food, eating less vegetables, these changes in our entire human behavior might be driving all of these things, right? So your literature search can take up on any or maybe a few of these aspects, right? Like, do we have any evidence for declining physical exercises among humans? Do we have any evidence for bad food habit, right? Are we eating more crap now than we used to? The changes to our jobs, right? Sedentary jobs versus more physical activities. Well, as an ecologist, I cannot help think about the impacts of environmental pollution, right? Are we breathing in more polluted air? Because, like especially living in an industrial area like New England, closer to Boston, right? Are we more immunocompromised? Our health, do we compromise our health by breathing polluted air? And particularly don't, like if you think about what's going on in the western part of the country, right? That's going to impact our survival, right? That is actually polluted air, right? And then how about with climate change, that induces a climate driven physiological stress upon us? Is that actually impacting us physiologically? How about everything compounding to create a mental ill health, right? So, or the non-infectious diseases, diabetes, cancer, heart diseases, other cardiovascular problems, right? So based on all of those things, you can actually kind of develop, really cool rationale for your hypothesis, right? If you were to suggest that human survivorship is lower, declining in um, the modern era compared to historical times. Well, um, so that's actually, kind of a much more stronger background that I'm setting up for you. So what you have to do is, you first start reading literature, right, to find information in support of your hypothesis, right? And then, well, speaking of literature, right, there are two forms of literature: primary literature, secondary literature. Primary literature is actually original research, right? Those articles that follow IMRAD format: introduction, methods, results, discussion, is IMRAD format, right? So any article that has that format is primary. Most of the articles published in research journals, scientific journals, biological science journals, that is primary literature. Textbooks, some reports tends to be secondary literature. Review articles that are published in journals are secondary literature. So when you gather information for your introduction part, at least I want you to cite two primary sources of literature, right? At least two, not a whole lot. I'm not asking for a lot, like just two is fine. So when you're writing introduction, after you dig literature to support your hypothesis, to build up your background, now you can start the introduction. So I said earlier, the first paragraph of introduction is about bigger picture, right? So what is your bigger picture here? You are trying to study what influences human life expectancy, or rather what influences human survivorship. Well, those two are very connected, right? And how it has changed over time, right? You can actually provide what you learned in your literature survey in the two papers you read. Now, by the way, if you are very ambitious, if you want to read, if you love reading like I do, you are more than welcome to read more than two literature. If you cite more than two literature, I will provide you bonus points, right? But if you just read two, I'm very sure, very much certain, that should be good enough to earn good points, earn a higher credit for this particular assignment, right? So and then the next part is, what do we know related to your hypothesis, right? What is the current background knowledge regarding what drives human life expectancy, what drives human survivorship, what drives mortality, right? So you can just summarize a couple of things here and there, right? And then, so that's actually, okay, so what do we know so far is actually when you summarize what you learned through your literature search, you are summarizing what you know so far, right? And then you come up with what do we do not know so far, right? Well, of course, this is what we know, what we don't know. So with related to this hypothesis that I just used, like historical versus current, what we don't know is, yeah, we generally, there might be support or belief, or I don't want to use the word belief. I'm sure there are a lot of literature suggesting in generally that lifestyle of humans have gotten worse. Our habits are unhealthy. We are eating crappy food. We are not exercising very much, right? Or we are breathing like shitty air, drinking shitty water, right? Eating contaminated food, God knows what, right? But we don't know whether, like, how these kind of issues impact certain regions, right? So do we maybe for entire North America, yes, it is true that our lifestyles have gotten worse. It's true that we are not exercising enough. Maybe it is true that we are breathing, our environment is polluted. But how does that impact at a smaller regional scale, like a smaller town in southern New England, in southeastern Massachusetts, relatively further away from Boston, in the suburbs? Like, how does those environmental factors, those human behaviors, impact the human population at a very small local scale, right? So we probably don't know that, right? So that's actually a gap in the knowledge. We may not know within the last half a century or so, within the last couple of centuries, if you look at populations from the last couple of centuries, how does those two populations change in a smaller town in Bridgewater? We may not have enough locally tailored studies to understand what drives human survivorship. So that's actually how you think about the gaps in current knowledge, right? And your hypothesis actually addresses that particular gap, right? And again, the male-female situation. Yeah, there are lots of studies about male-female, lots of debate about, the sex-specific, gender-specific susceptibility to mortality, right? But how does that change in different parts of the world, in different geographies, in different towns, in different parts of North America? We don't know that. So that's actually the gap, right? So, and then, well, we talked way too much about predictions and hypothesis rationalization, and this is exactly where the literature you read comes in, right? And then why do you care? Well, because once we understand where we have a problem, right? Once we know that, if we know that current human population is actually, despite all the medical advances, if we find that we are actually having poor survivalship, right? If we have some patterns in age-specific mortality, then we can actually tailor our medical needs, medical advances towards that specific age classes where we have a higher mortality risk. If we identify a particular location, a geographical area like Bridgewater, there are abnormal patterns in mortality, then we can actually take public policy actions, medical policy actions, or apply some, more healthcare into that particular area. So that's the importance of the study, right? Even in terms of basic sciences, right, it helps us to understand over time, right, how does the human demography and human survival has changed. So there are many benefits, doing a study like that, right? Always do not forget, when you talk about what we know so far, when you rationalize your hypothesis, cite, right? You could be citing the same paper several times. That's fine, right? At least if you have two more, you earn full credits. But if you want to cite more, please do cite more. Like my understanding in the past, students who actually aced in this assignment cite more than the minimum, and they actually earned extra credit for doing so. And again, remember in your writing guide in chapter 4, read the part about how to write an introduction. That provides a lot, that kind of summarizes everything I'm telling you right now. Writing the methods part is extremely easy. First, look at chapter 7, the part that describes how to collect data and how to analyze data, right? And I explained the data collection part already, right? So first part in the methods is actually study site. So in the study site, you can actually add the two maps that you have already created. Now remember, some of you had problems with your maps. So if I had some comment on your map, right, do address those comments, make those corrections, right? So I need to provide you some warning based on my experience after graded your GPS activity. Do not use the 3D vision, right? Do not turn your 3D feature on in Google Maps, right? Because 3D maps actually kind of, creates, like if you're looking at the taller buildings or like a lot of vegetation cover, the vegetation cover will kind of smother what you're looking at, right? So turn off the 3D, look at the 2D feature, and give me a map. Don't just randomly take screenshots, guys. I told you specifically not to go for random screenshots, right? I showed you very in great details how to take a good map. I mean, most of you did that. Most of you actually earned the full credits, but few of you did not take my advice seriously. So and also don't add photographs from Google Earth, right? Google Earth, when you zoom too much, it becomes a photograph. So map is not a photograph, guys, right? Don't add a photograph of a tombstone, right? So just add a map. And again, most of you in my lab section did a perfectly great job with picking up maps. Add those maps, right? Add those maps on the study site, and also add a short description about the study site. Mention what cemetery name is actually historical, which one is modern. Mention when each cemetery was established, what year they were established, how many burials were done, when was the last burial done, right? And if you were to stick with the two examples I provided in the lab manual in chapter 7, we provide some basic information. So you just have to write that information right over here. Easy. So study site part is extremely short. Then you go into the procedure, how you collected the data. Oh, one more thing about the map. Don't forget to provide a caption, right? Your maps are figures, so you have to say figure 1 study site, this particular cemetery A, right? Historical cemetery, you can actually add a very slightly detailed caption to mention when it was first established and the fact that you can mention it is historical. That's it, right? And again, some of you actually did a fairly good job in terms of describing, providing a good caption, right? So make sure that you provide a caption, and make sure the caption is provided at the bottom of the map, not on the top, right? Not on the side, on the bottom. When you write the procedure, you are going to report it in active voice, past tense, first person, right? I collected data on 100 headstones in First Cemetery and Mount Prospect, right? And I visited Cemetery A and B on October 1st. I collected data on sex, age at birth, age at death on X number of tombstones, right, in this cemetery and that cemetery. And then what you did, then I calculated the age at death, right, and then I constructed a life table, right, with 10-year age classes. Based on the life table, I constructed the survivorship curve and plotted my modern cohort dataset against historical cohort dataset, right? Constructed 2 survivorship curves and compared their differences, right? I constructed the similar survivorship curve for males and females to test my second hypothesis. So it's simply as that. And actually you can go a step further and said, for all data analysis, I used Microsoft Excel version, I don't know, whatever the version you use, 2010, 2015, whatever that is, right? Done. It's as easy as that. Again, well, that's basically all I have for you in terms of instructions. The process is fairly easy. Oh, in terms of the length, usually the question is how much do I have to write? So the golden question, how much should I write here for the intro? Remember, intro includes hypothesis, the basic background information, prediction, importance, yada yada yada, right? Well, for all of that, I mean, remember, you are only required to read 2 papers, right? So please don't write more than a page. A page is also too long. If your intro part is about 200 to 250 words, that's actually more than enough. That's actually terrific. That's fantastic, right? I will tolerate going around a page, but please don't exceed that. I really don't think there is enough stuff to write for a page, right? So keep it very short and sweet, right? Everything I explained can be right within, maybe at most it will take 300 words, right? But not more than that. So keep it short, guys, right? And write in full sentences. Make sure it's grammatically correct. Don't write bullet forms, right? Make sure those are like complete sentences that are meaningful, that flows very well, right? And then the methods part, well, again, it should not take more than 1 page. In fact, 3/4 of a page is more than enough for that, right? And sometimes if you are writing effectively, you should be able to write that in a half a page, okay? So again, in this part, write complete sentences, right? For both sections, intro part and methods, write complete sentences. Make sure your sentences, like flow into each other very well, right? Make sure that, like you separate paragraph in your introduction part, right? Make sure you separate paragraph in your methods part, as it is relevant. And do not put bulleted points, right? This is a serious activity, right? You will lose point needlessly, right? Make sure your sentences are grammatically correct. And also use a scientific style of writing, right? Look at the way how they write in a scientific paper, right? Read the writing, the writing guide. See how they instruct you to structure sentences, right? Adopt that particular style, right? And you should be fine, right? Last but not the least is actually just showing you what we expect in terms of grading. So in terms of introduction, what we expect is, that you set up a very good, strong conceptual basis with sufficient background information, right? 2, your hypothesis clearly stated, right? With rationalizations, right? And with the predictions and with justifications of your rationales, right? And factual statements are cited with references, right? And for the methods part, we want your study site clearly identified, describe the field methods that you performed are correctly described in appropriate detail, and the methods of data analysis clearly indicated. That's what we are looking for. And then, of course, do not forget to cite your literature, right? And make sure to format the literature in the way we expect you to do we explained in chapter 6, right? And remember that the minimum two articles you cited in introduction, right, should be cited in the literature cited section, right? And that you are using credible sources, minimum of 2 primary literature, right, and properly correctly formatted. And then of course generally, right, writing coherent sentences, complete sentences, well formatted, well written, is what I expected. And again, see this point, right? So right, if you actually do anything in addition, if you take an extra step, I will provide bonus points, right? So if you work hard, I'm going to honor that, right? So please do not forget to include the literature cited component. Okay, that's you would easily forget it. It's a smaller part, easy way to lose point, but shouldn't forget. It's nothing. It is simply it's as simple as formatting whatever the few literature papers that you read. Well, this is actually it, guys. Good luck with finishing this up, and drop in for office hours if you need any help. Bye bye.